Let's say that a contract has some state variables and functions. In Solidity, you have to declare whether a child contract, other contracts, or accounts have access to these state variables and functions. In this video, we're going to go over the 4 keywords that determine the visibility of state variables and functions. These keywords are private, internal, public, and external. A state variable or a function declared private means that it is only accessible inside the contract that defines it. For example, if a contract has a private state variable and another contract inherits from that parent contract, then the child contract does not have access to that private state variable defined in the parent contract. When a state variable or a function is declared as internal, then that means that it is accessible inside the contract itself and the child contract, but it is not accessible by other contracts and accounts. A public state variable or a function is accessible by any contract and any account. And if a contract has an external function, then that function can only be called by other contracts and accounts. And an external state variable does not exist, since it doesn't make sense to have a state variable that stores data only be accessible by other contracts and accounts. That's enough talk for now. Let's see some code. Here we have a private function named privatefunc that returns the string private function called. And the private keyword makes this function only accessible inside this contract. And if you deploy this contract, you'll notice that you cannot call the private function. But it is perfectly fine to have a public function and inside it call the private function. But a child contract cannot call this function since the keyword private makes this function only visible inside the contract that it is defined in. An internal function can be called inside the contract that it is defined in and also inside the child contract. And we're going to test this out by creating a public function inside the base contract and the child contract. Inside the function, we're going to call the internal function. Recompile and deploy both the base and the child contract. And you can see here that both contracts are able to call the internal function inside the public function. A public function can be called inside this contract by child contracts, by other contracts, and accounts. An external function can only be called by other contracts and accounts. So that means you cannot call this function inside another function. Here, I've created a public function that calls the external function inside it. This code will not compile since the external function is not accessible inside the contract. It can only be called from other contracts and accounts. And the same visibilities apply to state variables, except the keyword external. A state variable cannot be declared as external. Doing so, you can see here that the code does not compile. Although private state variables are only accessible inside the contract, this does not mean that you should store sensitive information inside it. Since everything on the blockchain is visible to everyone, it is not difficult to find the value stored in a private state variable. And the same caution should be applied to internal state variables as well. In this video, we went over the 4 visibilities that our state variable and functions can have. Private means it is only visible inside the contract. Internal means it is only visible inside the contract and child contract. Public means it is visible to the contract, child contract, other contracts, and accounts. External means it is visible to other contracts and accounts, and not visible inside the contract. And don't store secrets inside private and internal state variables. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.